This session is sponsored by the Boys to Men communities who have participated and arranged and worked on and set up this summit. Boys to Men Mentoring San Diego, Boys to Men Hawaii, Boys to Men NorCal, and Boys to Men Texas. Many thanks to each of these communities for all they've done. I'm super excited to introduce to you Dr. Gail Gross, a member of the American Psychological Association of Division 39. Dr. Gross is a nationally recognized family and child development and human behavior expert, author, and educator. A dependable authority, she has contributed to numerous broadcast, print, and online media, including CNN, The Today Show, CNBC's Doctors and on PBS. Her TV and radio talk shows, Let's Talk with Dr. Gail Gross, ran for 3 and 4.5 years respectively. Dr. Gross received a BS in education with a minor in psychology. She earned a master's degree in secondary education with a focus in psychology, as well as advanced English studies from the University of St. Thomas in Houston. She gained an ED in education with a specialty in curriculum instruction and specialty in psychology from the University of Houston. Dr. Gross received her second PhD in psychology with a concentration in Jungian studies. Active on the board of directors of the Dr. Dean Ornish Preventive Medicine Institute, Dr. Gross co-authored the book Beautiful Skin, the 8 Basic Steps to a Lifetime of Glowing Health, that was published in 1985, and also authored the books The Only Way Out is Through, a 10-step journey from grief to wholeness, that was published in 2018, and her latest book, How to Build Your Baby's Brain, a parent's guide to using new gene science to raise a smart, secure, and successful child, which was published just last year. Dr. Gross is also the creator of 8 audio tapes on relaxation and stress reduction, and most recently, Dr. Gross's book, The Only Way Out is Through, which is absolutely amazing, was named a Next Generation Indie Book Awards silver medalist finalist in 2020. Her latest book, How to Build Your Baby's Brain, was the National Parenting Product Awards winner in 2019, the Nautilus Book Awards winner last year, and ranked #1 Best New Parenting Book of 2019. It is also listed among the top 10 parenting books to read in 2020 by Book Authority, as well as the Next Generation Indie Book Awards Gold Medal winner this year. This is absolutely my absolute pleasure to introduce to you and for you to meet Dr. Gail Gross. Welcome, Dr. Gross.
Hi, thank you.
You are one of my mentors. You've been mentoring me in Jungian psychology, as well as all sorts of steps in personal development. I've just been a real blessing in my life. So welcome. Excited to hear from you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. This is really a wonderful opportunity for me to talk with you. Your program is just Boys to Men, just couldn't be more succinct, and really what I wanted to talk to you about today. You know, a number of years ago, there was a fellow, a psychologist, Philip Zimbardo. He did, those who are familiar with his name will be familiar that he did the Stanford study. And most recently, he spoke at TED, and he talked about how we're failing our boys today. And he doesn't have a solution, but he puts a lot of the focus on technology, how boys today are using technology for their models, for their role models. You know, Albert Bandura tells us that we're social learners. You know, Desmond Morris calls us the naked ape, that we're learning through imitation, just like every other primate. But if a father isn't there, even in the world of primates, to teach that adolescent primate how to cross the barrier from childhood into adulthood, that primate is at a deficit. Even, I know you're all familiar about the danger of hunting or being in the wild with bears, that bears can attack, but it's actually adolescent bears that are really dangerous. Why? Because they haven't had enough programming from the adult bears to show them how to avoid humans and not get shot and not be aggressive towards humans in the wild that they come across in the wild. So each generation has to teach the next generation. And I can so well remember being at Tick Chick Lodge in Alaska. I'm such a peacenik, I wouldn't fish, but I accompanied everyone. And And there was an item in the news and a little video that even in a remote place like Tikchik, Alaska, this mother bear's little baby cub crossed the river independently of his mother, went into a boat that had a captain on it, fell asleep in the captain's cabin. When the captain opened the door, the little bear ruined everything in the room. He was so frightened, ran out. His mother screamed for him. He crossed the river back to his mother. She hauled off and smacked him in the face, and then they all went toddling off. So we see in the wild, in every respect, that children of every kind need to be parented. They need to know how to walk in the world. Our species, in particular, has only two people that are important. And in fact, if you were a Jungian, you would say there's only two people in any child's world, from birth to death, mother and father. And every relationship is based on those early patterns from childhood. So how I interact with my mother, how I interacted with my father, has everything to do with how I'm going to interact with you. And that was the orbit or my world growing up, where I honed my skills. I learned to adapt. I learned to adjust. I learned to maneuver, because those were my first teachers. Now, we all know how important mother is, but I don't think that mothers of boys recognize how powerful their imprint is on their son. But it is the nurturing, it is the caretaking, it is the protection of the mother to the infant that is a longing that stays with the male until he learns how to move beyond it and self-satisfy and then have relationship. So in the beginning, mother is everything. But the importance of father is that he keeps the child from becoming paralyzed in mother. Because if the child doesn't separate from mother in adolescence, he is forever infantilized. He is forever crippled. He is forever at a deficit. And he's not only at a deficit for how he walks in the world, because now he doesn't really know how to walk in the world. He only has the feminine. But he's at a deficit with his feelings, his self-esteem, his sense of self, his security. And if you were a Jungian, you would say that within each of us is a male and female part. Jung called it the anima and the animus. If you're a male, your animus is natural to you, and you have this other part, the anima, which is the feminine of you. And in midlife, if you're a male, you've kind of used up your animus. So you have to reach more for your feminine, because that's where the vitality is still. That's where the energy is still. But the perfect scenario is a balance, a harmony of anima and animus. But a boy that's dominated by his mother and never escapes or separates from mother so that he can come back as an equal in a mutual relationship, that boy starts having a problem with his feminine side. Nobody likes to be dependent, but he feels dependent. Nobody likes to be vulnerable, but he's vulnerable. Nobody wants to be protected, but he wants to be protected. Today, we have a modern problem where we see boys living at home in their 30s, how they go to the internet for their gratification, for pornography, for interest, for video games, for interest of socialization and internet, not with people, but in technology. So this new problem Jung saw at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 20th century. He saw it before technology came into being, but he saw the problem with the infantilizing of the male, because fathers were so needed to help that boy separate from mother. And father is so needed to show that boy how to walk in the world, how to adapt, how to protect, how to adjust, how to learn about the world and cope. All of this relies on father being able to separate the son from his mother at adolescence in a positive way. But what are we missing today? What did Marie von Franz, the disciple of Jung, and Jung recognize very early on? We are missing fathers. Fathers at the turn of the century were working all the time. They came home, many of them were passive when they came home, or nobody taught them how to come to terms with their activation of their masculinity, what it was to be independent. And so they too were stuck in the feminine. And therefore, what did they become? Patriarchs. Because being stuck in the feminine, they went against the anima. And by going against the anima, against the feminine, they dominated, they bullied. But of course, we know that anyone who dominates, anyone who bullies feels very fragile inside. But men at that stage were very fearful of the power of women, not just in Europe or the Western world, but all around the world. Think about it. In our culture, we say Mother Earth, Mother Church, Divine Mother, the Madonna, the whore in the Madonna. So the power, the infusion of power in the female is so much that the male who is not in harmony or not in balance with his own anima will go against the anima and try to suppress the female. And that's really what we've seen around the world today. That's what we see in the patriarchy. Now, women are escaping from this, and men need to take really a lesson from the way women are escaping from the power of the dominant male and release himself from the all-devouring mother. Because the mother that doesn't have a present husband, a mother that doesn't have the male in her life, will take all of that energy and project it onto her son. He will become the missing love of her life. He will become the one she dominates. He will be the one who can never leave her. Even if he marries, he has to marry her. So at the end of the day, it's important for us to individuate, to separate, and most important, it's important today that we pay attention to the absentee father. In past generations, we had tribal elders who could walk that male through the separation. And these ceremonies of initiation had to be so elaborate because they had to separate the boy from whom? His mother, the most powerful figure in his life. So I don't know if any of you watched The Emerald Forest years ago. It was a very interesting movie, but I find, and Jung found, that a lot of movies are initiatory. And in The Emerald Forest, you have the boy, and he's in the water with his father, and his mother comes along the crest of the mountain, and the father yells to her, and he says, "Wife, say goodbye to your son today, for tonight he will die, and you will never see this son again." And so he has cued his wife to know that the elders of the tribe are going to create an initiatory experience, a passage, a rite of passage from childhood into adulthood for their child. And so now, when a boy is in a more primitive environment and takes perhaps called a vision quest or some type of symbolic and metaphoric quest, he actually will be wounded in some way. He must suffer a wound to actually be able to escape from the devouring mother. So this means that he possibly would be kidnapped in the night from his bed so that there's terror, taken into a dark place in the forest where he may be thrown into a cave or even buried, though he'll still be alive, but he'll be wounded and he'll be separated from his mother on his own for maybe months, only with the tribal elders doing ceremonies and initiatory ceremonies to help this boy become a man. Because the elders are going to teach him what the father must teach his son today: how to walk in the world, how to be in the world, how to become an individual, a whole person, not a person that's going against shadow, not a person that's separating himself from his anima, but a conscious person who can consciously walk in the world deliberately by being in union with the opposites inside of him. Because what is unconscious inside is dangerous, because we will act it out unconsciously through projected behavior outside the world. Jung said the most dangerous thing on earth is the unconscious of man if he doesn't become conscious, if he doesn't understand how to individuate. So whenever we bring up a problem, we need to bring up a cure. There is a cure in our culture for the absentee father. We have to stop making this as if it's something to be valued. A father has children with all these different people and never marries any. Or in some types of welfare, fathers have lots of children, but it's more financially good for him and for his mate to not marry. This is not good. This is a bad turn of events since the 60s in our own culture. Absentee fathers are the ruin of the boys of our today. And when we look at gangs, and we look at homegrown terrorism, and we look at these groups that have what Jung would call mana, we call in Hawaii energy, mana. These groups substitute for the boy, the family. And the leader of the group becomes who? The father. And the boy then becomes caught up in a mass hysteria. And he'll do things he never would do in his life, because he's looking and longing for that father, and therefore he's looking and longing to belong. And if you look back at, we always hold up Nazi Germany as this horrible thing, how could it ever have happened? But Jung would tell you that the collective shadow was bridged by the personal shadow, and that people bought into that collective shadow out of their own fear, their own anger, their own greed, and then did things that they never believed they had the capacity to do in their life. And then what happens when they act out like that? Shame, guilt, horror, self-hatred. This is a situation that boys find themselves in. Because if they can't find their way to the father, if the father can't be the elder, and there are no longer any tribal elders that help the boy move from childhood to adulthood, then the boy is lost. And then he self-loathes, he self-angers, he self-rages. And of course, you know that then he'll project those feelings out onto the other, onto the new wife, onto his children, at work, that shooting that happens and nobody understands what happened at the postal service, that a man just kind of lost it and killed everybody. It's that inner rage, because we have expectations of men, but we don't tell our men how to find their souls, the most important expectation. In primitive cultures, they have tribal ceremonies, initiations. We call them soul retrievals. And of course, the male that has to find his soul connect to his soul always has a guide. It's always the tribal elder. Or once he's in the descent, it can also be an animal. So we know that to find your soul, for the male, the adolescent, to find out who he is, he has to be in a descent. He has to be wounded. And then in that descent, guided by the elder, in our world, it would be great if he could be guided by his father. Then in the descent, he finds himself. He finds his soul by finding the most essential piece of life, the meaning of life for this boy. Not everyone's meaning is the same. I just listened to a seminar on the Dalai Lama, and he was talking about compassion and happiness. And of course, these are very important things, but they're very one-sided. And any one-sidedness can cause danger. We must come into balance. So when people ask me, don't you want to be happy? I say, yes, I do. But that's not my goal. Happiness is not my goal. Meaning is my goal. Because if I find the meaning to life, my personal meaning, my individual meaning, then I will be happy. Then I can walk in the world in a whole way, not denying half of myself and placing half of myself in shadow. There was a children's story long ago, and it was about this dragon that lived in the Middle Ages. And these nuns were able to capture this dragon and keep it in a prison underground in a cave. But naturally, as fairy tales have it, there was a mean one, a mean nun, and she allowed that dragon to escape. And there was a little boy in this town, in this medieval town, and he was the heroic figure. He was destined to be the hero that confronted the dragon. So he was sent to hero school to learn how to be a hero. And all these elders were teaching him how to walk in the world. But he became inflated. His ego was too big. Why? Because he was still immature. He was still moving from the mother. He was still moving from the infant. So the other boys were jealous of him, and they taunted him, and they said to him, okay, tell us your name, your real name. Because each boy was assigned a special name when they joined the hero school, knowing that the dragon, if you knew your particular name, could find you by your energy, by the energy of your name. But he had become so braggadocious because he was so caught in the infant, in the mother complex, that he told his name. And now what happened? The dragon found him. And now the little boy is standing parallel to the dragon. And he knows that that dragon looks like the size of a building to him. And he's just a little boy. And he can't really fight the dragon. He can't slay the dragon. He's too small. And he probably hadn't heard of David and Goliath. But nevertheless, he surrenders. And realizing he can't do anything else, he gives up. He surrenders to the dragon. And at the moment he surrenders, the dragon enters the little boy. And now the little boy becomes enormous, the size of the dragon. And now the little boy has brought back to himself his own powerful shadow, the disowned part of him. And by bringing it back, now he is empowered. Does he have to use that shadow? Not necessarily. But when he does, he has to use it consciously. We are all shadow and light. The hero can not only be the white light hero. He has to be shadow and light. We have to unite what is separate in us. We have to unite the opposites in us, shadow and light. One reason Jung loved going to Guatemala is because instead of having a white Madonna, they had a dark Madonna. Instead of having a white Jesus, they had a dark Jesus, because we are all shadow and light. And what's important is that we unite those parts of ourselves, our anima and our animus, our male and our female, so that we can be complete and whole. Anytime we deny part of ourselves, we will act out in projection what we're denying. The person that yells adulterer, 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 you can bet they're committing adultery. The pointing finger has 4 fingers pointing back. Only consciousness helps us. Only consciousness saves our planet, saves our culture. You know, we are losing our myth. Probably we have lost our myth, but we are in a very precarious place in our culture, because we weren't just dropped down from heaven and started living as people. We have a history, and that history defines us like anything else. We have to see ourselves in context to that history. So we have to have a myth. When the missionaries went to South America or Asia or anywhere else in the world, what did they do? They destroyed the myths of the local people. And when they did that, what else did they do? They destroyed the tribes. They destroyed the towns. They destroyed the culture. They destroyed the society. And that's where we're finding ourselves today. We are destroying our myths. And when we don't have a myth, it won't be too long before we don't exist. So it's important that we bring back fathers. We bring back our elders, our tribal elders, to teach our boys, to model for them, as Bandura said, we're social learners, to teach our boys how to walk in the world, how to activate the masculine within them, how to harmonize and balance the feminine and masculine within them once they find the masculine. So it's important that we learn how to do this. As I said earlier, never bring up a problem that you don't bring up the solution. So what is the solution? Jung tells us that the solution is individuation, that the solution is becoming conscious. Now, you know that all our leaders, whether it was Jesus or Moses or anyone you might mention, they all went up on a mountain, Buddha, they all had to separate from the tribe, go up on the mountain, go on the Bodhi tree, go in the desert, but isolate the inversion process. Go inside, break from herd consciousness, which is always unconscious, become the heroic figure by balancing the opposites and becoming conscious, which calls upon us to separate, to recognize and acknowledge our disowned material, what we call shadow. It's not bad, it's just unknown to us. It's in the shadow. To recognize that, to acknowledge that, to separate from that, and now take a good hard look at it. Once we do that, we can integrate it back into ourselves. When we integrate our shadow back into ourselves, now we're no longer compelled to act it out. What do we call that? Projection. The pointing finger has 3 pointing back. So now we're no longer projecting onto the other, whomever the other is. And now we're recognizing and acknowledging our disowned material. And only now can we integrate it consciously back into ourselves. Not suppress it, because what happens if we suppress it? We're using all our creative energy to hold down what we don't want to know, to hold down those feelings of vulnerability, those feelings of fear and anger and angst, to hold down those feelings that make us depressed, because anger turned in is depression. So all of that energy that we're using to hold down our feelings is our creative energy. And the minute we move towards consciousness, that energy returns to us, all that creative energy. And suddenly we have our vitality back. We have our libido back. So now we consciously integrate back into us our disowned material. We don't have to project it out onto others. We know where it is, and therefore it's not suppressed. We can tap into it anytime we want, and therefore we're free. Now we're conscious. This is how we individuate, and by individuating, we find our true vocation. You know, Hillman, James Hillman, who was the student of Jung, says, he wrote a book on the Acorn Theory. We're all acorns, and within the imprint of this acorn is the tree. And therefore, if left to our own devices, with nobody inhibiting us, we would just grow into this beautiful tree. But life happens, and therefore we must allow ourselves to find our potential, our destiny. And we can only do it through consciousness, so that we are no longer using our energy, our creative energy, to hold down or suppress our disowned material or project it out onto others. You all know the woman who continues to marry the alcoholic, or the man who keeps marrying the screaming shrew. Now, they don't want to keep marrying that same type, but it's only because they're unconscious, because they're constantly projecting out, that they're compelled to project out because of the unconscious material, that they gravitate to that type. Only when they bring that material that's being projected out to consciousness, integrate it consciously and deliberately, not suppressing it, only then are we free. Only then will he not any longer marry the screaming shrew. No longer then will she ever again marry the alcoholic, because now she's not compelled by hidden material. She's brought that material to consciousness, and it won't drive her to behavior anymore. No more projected material. So, you know, there's a story that Jung loved, and he said, if you understand this story, you will understand Jungian psychology without a PhD. And the story is about this wise man living in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, they need rain, and the rain isn't coming, and the crops aren't growing. And so they hire the wise man to do the dance or say the prayers or dancing and praying to bring on the rain. Because all these things we do, even in the passage, the tribal passage that the elders walk our children through, our male children through, is symbolic, metaphoric. We're not going to really kill our child. We're not going to really do these things. So there's a symbology to our life. And we haven't talked about archetypes yet, but we're getting to that now. And these symbols come from the archetypes that we're born with, that have the energy that drive us. You know, we have the mother archetype, the father archetype that has more energy than the personal mother. You always, I guess in the New York story, you might remember Woody Allen running down the streets of New York with his mother screaming at him, wear your boots, put on your hat. You know, the infantile son and the devouring mother, the mother complex. So this is what, when we speak of archetypes. And so in our dreams deliver up these archetypal images that we are then called upon to understand. So back to the rainmaker in the desert. Now here he is in the desert, and the tribal elders say to the rainmaker, what can we get you? What do you need to do your dance? What do you need to do your prayers? And he says, build me a simple hut. It just takes a few minutes. They build a simple hut. Now bring me some water. They bring him some water, put it in the hut. Bring me some food. Bring him some food, put it in a clean set of clothes. And then don't bother me for 4 days. And they needed the rain, I should have told you, by the 5th day. Now, believe it or not, on the 4th day, it rains. And so all the tribal elders run into the little hut, and they pull out the wise man and they say, "Oh, you brought us rain. What happened? What did you do in that hut?" And he said, "I hadn't started my work yet. Actually, I came into the village in such discord that I had to organize my inner self before I could do my work." That is Jungian psychology or psychiatry. We have in here, in the unconscious, everything. 99% of who you are is unconscious. You just don't realize it. You live your life reactively. You eat, you drink, you sleep, you may even meditate. Nevertheless, we're being moved by our ego consciousness. Now, our ego thinks it's the whole enchilada. It thinks it's who we are. But in reality, it was created by the unconscious just for function, just to keep us going, making this meeting on time, ending it on time, dressing, sleeping, making love, making children. All this comes from our function, but it's the unconscious that creates the ego. The ego just doesn't know it. So all of this that's going on inside needs to be united, needs to be balanced for us to get our real chance at consciousness and at life, at real life. The child that stays an infant all his life never has his life, never reaches his potential, never finds his destiny. Why? Because he never finds himself. He's living really as a child to the mother. He needs his father to show him the way. He needs those tribal elders, which today are our fathers. He needs fathers to be married to mothers and living at home, not passive behavior, not coming by once a week or once every 10 days or once a month or holidays. He needs father to guide him into adulthood. He needs father to take him out of childhood. Imagine how elaborate the energy has to be to separate child from mother, to separate him in adolescence so that now a wall comes down. A wall comes down and says, I'm not a child anymore. Now I'm moving as an adult, and I must take responsibility for myself. And so that movement into adulthood is what will save our youth, what will save our world, which will save our myth and our culture. It's the most important thing that we can give our boys, our children, and our world. And so once you are moving towards consciousness and you're approaching the journey, the symbolic journey of a passage, what happens? I like to say a circle or a set that holds your persona, who you were before this tribal ceremony, this initiation passage. Before that happens, you're a persona. You have a certain name. You're identified as the child of so-and-so. But suddenly, when you're in unfamiliar territory, when the tribal elders have captured you, kidnapped you in the night, throw you in a hole or a cave, suddenly that set that holds you, it cracks. And now you're thrown psychically into a middle place. In psychology, we call it a neutral zone, but I call it the valley of despair because it is despairing. Why? It's lonely, it's isolating, you're by yourself. with yourself, and there are no familiar structures there. All the old patterns of behavior are here in this set, but the tribal elders won't let you go back there. They won't let you go back to the old patterns of interacting. They won't let you go back to mother. So you have to hang out in this valley of despair. And what do you need to do in that valley of despair? Inner work, so that ultimately you can move to the outer with the inner life no longer in discord, the inner life in union, in consciousness. So what does that require? Inner work. What is inner work? Journaling, listening to contemplative music, specifically Baroque music, which is syncopated to your heartbeat in the Andante movement, 60 beats per minute. So it puts you in an alpha state, a very relaxed state, which throws more blood to the prefrontal cortex, relaxes you, your circulation is better, you hold images better, you process information better, you think better, and you use your brain, not in isolation, as the anecdotes tell us Einstein did, which he didn't, but as an orchestra, which is the way we're meant to use our brain and the way the brain is meant to be used. Like a symphony, everyone playing at the same time, all moving you towards wholeness. So now you keep another journal called a dream journal. Pay attention to your dreams. Respect those dreams. Here comes those pesky archetypes. How do they come to us? They come to us when our defenses are down. When are our defenses down? When we're sleeping. When we're sleeping, our defenses drop. That's where we get precognitive dreams that happen all around the world, intuitive dreams, and the unconscious speaking to us. Now, you may not know this, but the unconscious is trying to speak to you 24/7, every second of every day, but you're too busy to listen and have a conversation with it. And if you would stop through meditation, through dream work, you would access your unconscious. And now your unconscious will tell you everything, what's up and how to handle it. And it'll also tell you where you came from, your myth, your history. All of this wrapped up in these symbols we call archetypes. And so now if you do this inner work, you keep a dream journal, your unconscious will give you more, because it really realizes you're respecting it. Also, you want to walk and be by yourself, whether it's for a few days or a week or a couple of weeks. The inner journey is the journey you take alone, in isolation, so that you can hear your inner voice. And when you can hear your inner voice, it will lead you forward into the bigger you, the larger you. And that inner voice will teach you your true vocation, your destiny. Because who you are to be today, and this is a Dr. Gross quote, you are becoming. This is what we told our children as they were growing up. And so you do the inner work, and the inner work moves you forward just automatically, and it moves you into the larger you, the new set, the bigger you. You haven't gone back to the old way, to the old patterns of behaving, even though that's your comfort zone, that's your family of origin. No, you've hung out in the valley of despair. You've held your attention. You haven't done anything but inner work, meditate, dream journal, regular journal, listening to Baroque music, which puts you in a meditative state like meditation, puts you in alpha, so you use your brain better. You do the inner work, keep a journal that has a diary in it of your history, of your mother's history, of your father's history, so that you can get a bird's eye view of your history, how you react, how they react to trauma, how you react to trauma, either in opposition or in sync. So this information, this inner work, this inner journey, the most dangerous journey you'll ever take, Jung tells us, the journey into the unconscious will set you free. And now you move into the larger you. This is individuation. This is consciousness. This is how to be an adult. This is how to be responsible. This is what we must teach our children so they're not cheated from their future. So they're not using the internet or porn or video games to soothe themselves, to make themselves feel better that they're so lethargic, that they're not activated, that their masculine isn't activated, that they haven't united their anima and animus. This is what we owe our children. Fathers must come back to the home. Fathers must once again teach boys how to be men. I hope this helps. Thank you.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Gail. We have a billion questions. Are you open to a few Q&As?
I'm so open, absolutely.
Outstanding. Well, we have Daryl Moment who has a question for you. Daryl?
Just before that question, I want to say one thing that I forgot about the devouring mother, which is so important. If the father isn't present, the mother reaches for the child to fill in the affection that's missing from the father. And I know I mentioned it in this talk, but I want to focus on that because the child knows those feelings don't belong to him. And he feels guilty about that. And that's the energy he also suppresses. And that has a lot to do with his rage. Okay.
Yeah, wow. Daryl, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, outstanding. I didn't see your video.
No, I turned it off. I was having some bandwidth issues, but I want to say thank you. You know, I'm 63, and I guess for the last 20 years, through Mankind Project, I've had intuitive ahas. But you just laid out the topographical map. And I'm like, oh my God, I recognize an oasis when I find one. I recognize a meditative state when I'm in one. I recognize all of those touchstones. But I never knew there was a topographical map for them. Mm-hmm. And then my question is, I mean, you put this so succinctly clear. Why is it that our government and our educational system and our so-called community, whatever, is not looking at this solution? And I'm reminded, I remember the movie Wall Street where Gordon Gekko talks about there's no profit in feeding the poor. They can't afford it. I'm wondering, we spend so much money addressing the symptoms that if we cured the problem, there'd be no profit in it. I'm wondering, any comments you have to offer is valued, and thank you for this.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. You know, we've lost our myth, and we're in a very dangerous place right now. Psychologically, culturally, because of this, because we've lost our myth, we have moved ourselves to a technological arena so that our young boys, for example, masturbate in front of porn many, many times a week without ever socially interacting with a mate of any gender, just by themselves, self-satisfying. So what happens? They don't have any understanding of foreplay, of social cues, of how to interact with one another. That's how all these kids just hook up with one another and then go on their separate ways. Boys preferring to be with boys, girls preferring to be with girls. We've lost our myth. We've lost our way. Jung would say we've lost our soul. He felt that we were entering into a soulless period. And that's why the soul retrieval is so important. But, and think of it this way, so many expectations are put upon men and also women, but we're talking about men today, put upon men without any guidance, without any direction. And so They may have a job they hate and never find what resonates with their soul. And they'll just live out their life 9 to 5 doing something they hate for that paycheck or that command or whatever, and never find what gives them the juice for life, never find their soul. This soul retrieval requires a guide. A very famous psychiatrist, a Jungian psychiatrist, Jean Bolin, writes about the descent and how important in the descent, and the descent is part of any initiation, you must go into a descent. And even if you have a horrible illness and say it's cancer and somebody says you've got 4 months to live, immediately your psyche throws you into a descent. Now, some people in that descent will activate remission because they found the meaning of life for them in that descent, in that second that they were cast down without any structures, what I call the valley of despair. But this is like an immediate casting down. And in some cases, these people have visions, have experiences, and recover. Now, not everybody, because not everybody can go there. But this is what we have to do for our children. This is what we have to do for our culture. We have to find our myth. What is the myth that we're living by today? Technology. And it's very impersonal. It's not intimate. It's soulless. And we've got to reconnect to our soul. I hope that helps.
Wow. That's wonderful.
And you can create your own rituals. And it's important to create your own rituals. Sit down and talk to the rock and see what he says back to you in conversation.
That's wonderful. T. Greg Squires has a question for you.
Yes, T. Greg.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm a big pseudo-Jungian practitioner, and we do a lot of work. Mankind Project and Boys to Men does a lot of work. And I recently came across Lying with the Heavenly Woman by Robert Johnson. Are you familiar with that book?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm very familiar with Robert Johnson.
Yeah, it's like 105. I recommend it to any man on this call. It is specifically geared for men to look at the 7 to 9 female archetypes that he will encounter in his life, from courtesan mother, courtesan, sister, friend, all of that. But the one that is, I think, central to the book that you speak of, which I would love all of our mentors to really get into their vocabulary and lexicon, is the battle with the mother complex. That is the adolescence boy's central fight with the dragon. And what we often see is the boys projecting that onto the mother, and so they are disrespectful or angry with the mother. They don't realize that they're really fighting the mother complex. And I think if we as mentors could get really versed in that, we could help them separate that out. My question goes to, because this came up with Dr. Farrell last night too, is I hear you're talking about we got to bring the fathers back, we got to bring the fathers back. And I'm like, okay, where are the fathers? Let's go get them. Because 50% of the boys we're dealing with, their fathers are incarcerated or are nowhere. So we're in a position where, and also, I mean, I love your the talk of inner work. I'm a life coach. That's what I do. I do soul transformational work. It is about exactly what you said, going in and I had my own emotional incestuous relationship with my mother. So I've done the dragon work and still doing it. It's lifelong, because when you get to be older, it's even harder. Than it's more appropriate when you're a teenager. So here we are. We don't have fathers. They're not just growing on trees. And both Dr. Farrell and you are saying, we got to bring the fathers. We got to get the fathers. Okay, great. But we don't have them. So what do we do? I mean, here we are as a mentoring organization doing our best to fill the gap. but I understand maybe you're talking more symbolically about bringing the fathers back, or bringing back the power of the father, or the rights of the father. But more practically, I'm like, okay, we don't, and, a lot of these boys are in such situations that, it's like the Twinkie experiment, where they went back and did it with a more cross section of kids instead of the privileged kids. And they found out that the kids that don't have a lot are going to eat that Twinkie right away. And they're not thinking about, I'm going to sit and talk the rock or anything like that. They're dealing with some really survival kinds of issues. So these are the things we're up against in our organization with boys who aren't in some sort of ready state to go there. They're more in a crisis state. So what would you say to us about that?
So, the fathers aren't something that's set aside apart from the tribal elders, for example, as Jung would say. In the tribes, the boys had fathers and they had tribal elders. And so today, if you said, what was the real neurosis of our time, is the real neurosis of our time is the lack of the passage into adulthood for boys. Because when we try to live in community, Freud tells us that the cost of civilization is neurosis. We have to give up parts of ourselves to be able to live in community. And we're willing to do that if it's done consciously, so that we aren't annihilated. But at the end of the day, yes, you become surrogate fathers, which is important. And the tribal elders were substitute fathers. That's important. But we've lost our culture because we've lost our myth. We've made it economically satisfying for men not to marry and women not to marry. You can make more money by not marrying, by having children out of wedlock. These things have to change. We have to make marriage important again. We have to make it a value again. And, Jung said he didn't look at a big picture. He looked at the small picture in reference to the big picture. Jung believed that until every single person became conscious, there was still the danger of total annihilation of our species. And in fact, when he died, he believed we would annihilate ourselves. And he didn't think it was that far off. So we have to do the inner work. And groups like yours, mentoring groups, absolutely help. But nothing will substitute for the longing that a child has for a parent. There's the mother complex, and we talked about that today. And of course, there's the father complex. But the father has such an important role. When a child is a baby, and I write about this in my book, How to Build Your Baby's Brain, mothers, protecting baby, feeding baby, nurturing baby, and baby needs all of that when he's a baby. But father will say, let him go, let him crawl a little further. Let's see where he ends up. Let him walk a little further. We're watching him. Let's see where he ends up. So father gives baby the courage to strike out, to explore, for adventure, to move out. You can't see the ocean, what's on the other side of the ocean, if you will never leave the shore. Father helps baby leave the shore. So yes, mentoring groups are marvelous in the way that they substitute, and substitution is very important. Nevertheless, fathers are very important. So we have to do things within our culture to make it wonderful to be a father, not terrible to be a father, to make it important to be a father, to encourage fathering, to encourage responsibility. And so The men right now that are in distress, incarcerated, battling alcoholism, drug addiction, they never were mentored. They never were modeled. No one showed them how to be in touch with their masculine. Nobody showed them how to activate their masculine. So they can't teach it to their children. But we can teach it to their children, and then their children can teach it to their children. That's how it happens. That's the whole idea of epigenetics. You make the change, and you make it consistently, and then it changes in your genes, and the next generation's got it. That's how we pass on altruism. We're really not an altruistic species, contrary to what people say. If the caveman were very altruistic, he wouldn't have survived very long. There's a piece of meat for me and not for thee. And I need to go further, and I'm going to eat my piece of meat. So we are actually becoming, this is hard to believe, I know, we're actually becoming a more peaceful species in a certain way, but we're compensating for that peaceful species, more peaceful, by teaching violence, video games, internet, pornography. We're teaching violence. And believe me, when we store a memory with the way we felt when we had the experience. So there's no true memories. There really is no true memory, actually. It's always colored by how we felt when we had the experience. The brain works in that way. It stores and we use our imagination to feel our feelings, and it stores our experience with our feelings. So no two people have the same memory. If I'm watching the movie Psycho, I forget I'm in a theater, and I jump out of my skin when Anthony, what's his name, picks up that knife and he's stabbing at the person in the shower. I know it's a theater. I know it's a movie. I know their characters. And I'm screaming my head off. And I'm watching it approach, and I'm screaming my head off. Because my imagination has put me in that movie. But here's what you may not know. My brain is responding to this as if I'm being abused. And it's storing that experience as an abusive experience. So that's what your children do when they watch violence. That's what you do when you watch violence. And enough violence creates interiorly in the brain the child that feels they've been abused, that experienced abuse. So we can change, but we have to do it consciously, deliberately. And therefore, we have to individuate. Through individuation, we can become whole. If we're resisting our shadow material, we're operating on half of a self. We're not operating on a whole self. We're not complete. We're at a deficit. If I don't have a good night's sleep tonight and I have to give a lecture, I have to be at a board meeting tomorrow. And all those people at that board meeting had a good night's sleep. I'm in a deficit. Now, there's a lot of things happening in my brain. My hippocampus is narrowing, my amygdala is enlarging. I'm thinking more emotionally and not thinking clearly or abstractly. And this whole prefrontal cortex process slows down. So I'm not really doing well with my executive function. So there's this chemistry happening with this body that can be, that we can affect through meditation, through exercise, through dream work, and we can make changes. This is what we call epigenetics.
Wow. We have a bunch of questions, and I know you committed to an hour. I'm going to ask Jean Falla if she could just briefly ask her question.
No problem.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for, I learned a lot that I didn't know previously, from your presentation. And you brought up the part about fathers and the importance of fathers. And it's just to add, you probably already know this, but just to continue to raise awareness that a lot of fathers that are separated, there's systemic barriers. It seems as though these days, with all of the services, supports, the way society is oriented, it's kind of like mom's always right. So if the couple is, if there's marriage or they're not married, there are, for what it's worth, a whole system of supports so that the father can be removed. And it's important to have services and supports and advocacy where both sides can be listened to. It's not just mom against, mom's right or dad's right or anything like that. But there's really a lack of, and it's very, and you've got the deadbeat dad stereotype, and the fact that there aren't services and supports for dads like there should be, for all kinds of fathers. And if there's an issue like his behavior, something like that, again, mom's always right. So I'm a supporter of a nonprofit in my area that runs family parent education programs. They have an excellent father involvement program, and they listen to the dad's side as much as the mom's side. And if they, the people that conduct the classes, they're therapists, they have their credentials and education and all that sort of thing. So I think that—
Do you have a question, Jean, for Dr. Gross?
Yeah, just to kind of comment. Just to comment on, sorry, I got carried away, but—
No, it's very interesting. And you're right on. You're spot on, and you've hit on something very
the need for services, support, and advocacy for fathers. That's all.
Right. You're exactly right. You're spot on. And the thing is, we're living in a time, and we've been living in this time for a long time, because Jung recognized it really before he died, and his number one disciple, Marie von Franz, started to write about it really in the middle of the 20th century. And and she predicted that we would be living under the mother complex right now. And exactly what you're saying is exactly what's going on. Because, whenever something has been too much one way, in one dimension, it flips to the other. And where we need to go, as the Dalai Lama says, is the middle way. We need to bring these, Jung said health is the union of opposites. We need to bring the anima and the animus together and unite them so that neither side dominates our behavior, that we're not dominated by anyone. In fact, it's the importance of freedom. It's the importance of individual freedom. I don't know if you've all read the book 1984, where everybody just kind of moves along in a zombie-like way and gives up all their rights to the collective. And Jung said the collective was the most dangerous place for life. And so at the end of the day, we have to look at this mother complex that's dominating our culture, because our boys are suffering. They're living at home into their 30s, 20s and 30s. There are all kinds of reasons, but basically it feels so nice to be safe and warm and collected in mom's house or mom and dad's house. And then there's a lethargy that develops, but it courses out into self-hatred and anger and angst. And then those feelings are taken out against women, or just the opposite, and they marry that mother and deal with all that behavior and end up depressed, sad. Depression is just really, anger is just depression turned, and depression is anger turned inward. So what we need is our libido back, our vitality back. And you can only get that back through consciousness. When you release what you're suppressing, and take back that energy, that's your creative energy. That's your libido. That's your vitality. That's what the rites of passage call rebirth. Remember, the child dies in the cave or the buried alive, and then the adult is born, reborn. And we go through rebirths all the time, but it requires conscious actions. It's just not going to happen out here. We are living under Woody Allen's mother as he's walking down the street, because we become very feminized as a culture, really in reaction to the patriarchy. So, and the patriarchy was a reaction to the power of women, the fear of birth, the fear of the creator. But what do we know about mother? What is an archetype for mother? An archetypal image for mother is the spider. Well, what is the spider? The creator and the destroyer. And it's important for mother to do her best job by pushing her little birdling out of the nest. In fact, there's a Jungian test that you're given as a diagnostic thing when you do, if you have an analysis. And it's about these little birds in a nest in a rainstorm. And the mother bird realizes that only one of her little birds can live. How can she choose? She loves all of her little birds. So she pulls up the first little bird and she says, "Little bird, come with me." She takes him out from the tree in the nest into the rain. And she says, little bird, if only one of us can survive, is it you or me?" And the little bird says, "Oh, you, mother, you. I would die for you. I couldn't live without you." And sadly, the mother bird goes bloop and lets the little bird go. Goes back to the next little bird, pulls him out into the rainstorm. Same story, same answer, bloop. Takes the last little bird out into the rainstorm, her last progeny. She says, little bird, if only one of us can survive, which one shall it be?" And he says, "Me. I must survive. I'm the future." That's the story of the Grail. That's the story of the Fisher King. I don't know if you know this. Jung used to love to teach with mythology, and he tells the story of Percival. Percival's father was a great knight. And he dies. So his mother shields him, doesn't want him to be a knight. She moves out into the country, out of the city. She protects him in her little castle. But his father's friends, those elders, come riding by one day and they say, "Well, young man, it's time for you to go on your heroic journey with us. We promised your father. You're coming with us." Oh, the mother has practically a heart attack. Her baby, now she's protected him for all these years, and now her husband's buddies are going to take him out on this journey, a heroic journey. So she knits him a cloak, and the cloak is to protect him. So he goes with these fellows onto a quest, and they come to a castle, and it's a holy grail quest, and he must ask the question, who does the grail serve? And all he has to do is, when the grail says, "What is your answer?" he has to give an answer. But he just doesn't feel entitled to make that answer, the answer he wants to make. And so he doesn't make the answer, and he's cast aside. And pretty soon the other guys die from old age, and he's still riding around. And now all that's left of his cloak is like a little postage stamp piece of material. He goes back to the castle. And now, again, he knocks on the door, and they ask the question, "Who does the grail serve?" And he says, "Me. The grail serves me." And now it is his. It's the philosopher's stone, the energy, the libido that's returned. It's the Fisher King. The wounded Fisher King lies by the river. What is he waiting for? The grail to heal his wounding. The scar will always be there, but the wounding will be healed, but only by the grail. So we know that it is important for us to help our boys walk in the world as responsible men. That's what will make the change. But right now, we have over-feminized our society, and we are living under the mother complex.
Wow. Whew. Dr. Gail Gross, thank you for going an extra 15 minutes with us. What a pleasure. You are an absolute gift. I do want to let everybody know that your latest book is How to Build Your Baby's Brain, a parent's guide to using new gene science to raise a smart, secure, and successful child. Dr. Gail Gross, I got requests if you could come back tomorrow and the next day and the next day. You are an absolute gift. Thank you.
I'm going to leave you with one more myth, and this will be my goodbye myth. This was Jung's, one of his favorite myths, and it's the story of Odysseus. And we all know that Odysseus goes on this long journey, and he leaves Penelope, and all these things happen to him on the journey. But finally, and he's very in his strong masculine, but not in touch with his anima at all. Doesn't know how to use his anima to help him. He's completely in the warrior mode. So he fights the Cyclops, and he knows how to. He takes the name no name, so the Cyclops can't find him, and he escapes that, and all the travails. But finally, this little journey to Ithaca that will return him to his wife has taken 10 years. He hasn't been able to get back, and now other men are after her because they want his wealth, his power, and his castle. So, and she's fighting them off. So he is now in his final battle, and these sirens are on a rock, and they tell him, forget the masculine right now, move to the feminine. In midlife, you've used up a lot of your animus. Move to your feminine. You can't move to your feminine if you've disowned it. You can't move to the anima if you've disowned it. So he says, what does that mean I have to do? What do I have to do? And the sirens say, surrender. Surrender. Don't do anything. Well, now the ship is broken on the rocks. It's destroyed. All that's left is the helm. And he throws his body over that, and he surrenders, and it floats him into Ithaca and back to Penelope, because now he's in touch with both sides of himself, his animus and his anima. And when you unite the opposites, a union of opposites, you're whole, you're complete, you can find your destiny, and more than that, you're conscious. So have a wonderful conscious day. God bless you all.
Mahalo.